Well, hello and welcome to the B2B Growth Think Tank. Now, joining me today to talk business growth is someone who has built a successful business, helping over 40,000 businesses to see how making small changes can have a dramatic impact on revenue, cash flow, and profitability. Now, he does this as the co-founder of ProjectionHub, where since launching the company in 2012 with his brother, so it's a bit of a family affair, they provide software, templates, and consulting services to create financial projections for investors, lenders, and to help with internal planning of businesses. Now, as cash flow and profit always win the day when it comes to our businesses, it's vital to measure and track your numbers, finances, and KPIs. So that's not just to be able to accurately project your growth, but in doing so, what it also allows you to do is uncover some of those hidden opportunities that often with a small shift could give you a radical boost in your sales and profitability. So it's a subject I know that a lot of you are going to get some huge benefit from. So I am absolutely delighted to welcome my guest today, Adam Hoeksema, to the show. Adam, how are you doing?
Hey, doing really well. Thank you for having me. Excited to have the conversation.
Awesome. Well, I think, as I said when we first spoke, it's not a name I'm going to forget, or at least the first name I'm not going to mispronounce. So,
Right.
yeah, I always find it almost a bit strange when I have to do an interview. I've had another Adam on here before, for example, and I have to say Adam this and that, and it's like I'm talking to myself. It's like I'm
Yeah.
doing a solo episode. But anyway, so Adam, coming on to that, let's say you were in front of an ideal client. How do you describe what you do and how you help them?
Yeah. So a lot of our clients tend to be brand new startups, maybe in that planning phase. And so they're trying to raise capital from investors or lenders. And typically what happens is they haven't already worked on projections because no one wants to do projections. At least most of us don't want to do them. And so, the investor says, hey, send me your projections. And they quickly panic and say, how do I do that? And that's where we come in. So whether it's our software that can help you walk through that step by step, or one of our industry specific Excel templates, we make that process a lot less painful for people.
So I guess one of the things that maybe people are thinking is thinking, right, or they're hearing financial projections, and maybe it's like a few eyes glaze over and it's like, oh, what's that about? Or do I really need to do this? Or finance. Why is it so important to get this right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk at it from kind of two different sides. From the startup phase, when you're starting a business, I mean, you're making a huge time commitment and probably putting in some of your own dollars, or if you're signing your name on a loan, you have personal risk. And so you want to make sure that you've actually done the math and figured out, like, can this actually work? and what is it going to take? Not just, I think a lot of times, even just in simple businesses, a coffee shop business, for example, and, client does the numbers and realizes I have to sell, 500 cups of coffee every day to break even with the model that I have in place. It's like, yeah, oh, well, I don't know if I could do that. Maybe, maybe I shouldn't start this business. So on the startup side, I think that's really an area of focus and why you need to do it. I've worked with a lot of existing businesses where they're thinking about starting new services or product lines. And really that's like a startup within their existing business. And so you're really looking at the same thing. Should we take away our focus from our core business? Should we take dollars from that? And is it going to make sense? Even internally, ourselves at ProjectionHub, we've worked on projects where we're thinking, oh yeah, this will make sense. And then when we really run the numbers, it's like, boy, if we do this really well, it's going to hardly make a dent, and it's not really going to matter. And so that's what the projections help you figure out. Will it actually matter?
Yeah, and I guess that the beauty of thinking in a projection model, or with a projection model mindset, is that the numbers will never lie. And I think that we, as business owners, entrepreneurs, whatever we want to call ourselves, we are quite good at lying to ourselves sometimes. And I think that maybe one of the reasons why, I referenced the eyes glazing over, or it's something that people don't always want to necessarily do until, a bank forces you to do it, for example, if it's a loan required or an investor or something like that. We don't want to do it because maybe it's kind of like going to tell us that our baby's ugly, or maybe it's going to sort of show us that our grand vision is not going to come to fruition as quickly as maybe we'd have thought. I mean, what are some of the other common things that you've sort of found that people uncover in the process of doing this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of times it's that realizing how slow of a process it's probably going to be. When you're doing projections, a lot of times what people will do is they'll do some Googling, and they'll say, what does the average, dental office do in revenue per year? And then they just kind of assume that they're magically going to get to that average, right away, or year one is an average year. But in reality, you have to go acquire those customers. You got to acquire those patients, and that can be a long, slow build. And, you may have operating expenses that you have to pay before you break even for quite a while. And so I think that's one of the things that people often see, that it could be a little bit discouraging, but it's also really important to know going in, so that you don't run out of cash too soon.
Well, yeah, because I mean, cash flow is the number, or lack of cash flow is the number one killer of the majority of businesses. It's not something we all necessarily think about when we start, because I guess the thing that makes us all start is the vision, the passion, and all the rest of it. And getting into the nitty gritty when it comes to things like cash flow, it doesn't always come to mind, but then reality bites, right? And do you find that there is a particular time when people start to look at projections seriously? Is it, I mean, you mentioned startup, you mentioned existing businesses. Are there common times when people really use these, maybe not necessarily just for, say, investment, but for other areas of their business, internal planning, and what are the benefits of doing that?
Yeah, one area that we've seen people use it for planning, just in an existing business, is when they're looking to maybe do a digital marketing campaign, or really any kind of marketing campaign, because there's some costs associated with that. And they need to go through the math to figure out, okay, if I spend this much to acquire a new customer, when do I break even on that? Should I keep paying Google for these ads, or Facebook for these Facebook ads? And when does it make sense? And when am I losing money or breaking even? Because if you don't do the math, what will happen is it'll feel good. You'll go and you'll start spending some ad dollars, and sales will jump. And you're like, man, I'm selling more. This is great. But it's easy to, again, even just us internally, we've been doing Google AdWords ourselves for the last probably year and a half. And, it's taken a lot of time to figure out, like, let's make sure that we're making gross profit on this. So I think that's a good exercise.
Yeah. And I think what you touch on there is something that maybe we all know intuitively, but we don't always necessarily have a process for doing. And that is, it's measurement, it's understanding your numbers. It's kind of going, right, okay, well, what is my objective around, say, this project? Your example of Google ads. It's like, right, well, what is my objective? How much am I willing to spend to acquire this client or customer? And am I achieving that? And it could well be looking further ahead as well within your projections, for example. And it could well be looking at something like your lifetime value of a client and thinking, well, actually, I am willing to spend break even. I am willing to literally not make any money on my acquisition because I know on the back end, I will make 3 to 4 additional sales over the course of the next 6 months to 12 months or something like that. That's a strategy. That is a strategic use of the numbers and applying them to something like Google AdWords. But I don't think it's always the way that it is applied. I think that it's a bit too easy sometimes to go, well, I just want to go and do some Google AdWords and I want some clients. And people spend too much time focusing on the wrong numbers, like cost per lead. It's like, well, actually, it doesn't matter how much your cost per lead is. It matters what your acquisition cost is, in comparison to your your client value. So do you find any other sort of mistakes that people make when it comes to projections, whether it's for a campaign type experience like that, or whether it's sort of projecting profits, revenues in general? Are there anything that people tend to do that they really would be better off avoiding?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's a lot of times projections come down to a series of assumptions that are conversion rates, and we're trying to do the best that we can to find some industry standard conversion rates. But oftentimes, if you haven't been doing it already and you don't know your conversion rates, a lot of times people will say, well, I think surely I could get 7% of people that come to the website to buy my thing, or sign up for the service or whatever. And I think just hearing e-commerce conversion rates are like 1.7% or something along those lines. So 1.7 just sounds so bad. So everyone wants to put a higher number in that conversion rate, and if you put 7%, your projections are going to look way better than they probably are. So I think it's as often as you can, trying to, either from your own experience, know your actual conversion rates. So can you measure what you've been doing, know how often you convert a lead, so that when you build it into the model, let's say you're hiring a new salesperson, and you might be, before you make that decision to hire, you might do some projections just to make sure you can do that, you can make the hire. You better be using the right conversion rates, as best you can. So that's a mistake we see a lot. And then, it can have such a dramatic increase on your projections, and really give you some overconfidence.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's always, I think, I'm trying to remember now, back in my corporate days, and we used to talk about forecasting and all the rest of it. And one of our directors he would say, well, forecasting says more about the forecaster than the reality of achieving, or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was, but when it comes to reality as opposed to projection and forecasting, I mean, have you seen that there is a big disparity between the two?
Yeah, that's interesting. We're actually going through a bit of a research project on our own right now. We think we have enough data from clients that we've worked with on consulting projects in the past to be able to kind of aggregate some projection data. And what we want to try to figure out is how does that compare to some actual numbers for different industry types. So a B2B SaaS company, software as a service company, what do they project when they're working with us versus what does an average B2B SaaS company do in year 1, 2, and 3? So I don't have that particular data yet. I know just intuitively and just from seeing what our clients do. I mean, it's always generally optimistic. It's generally, the projections are overly optimistic, at least in the first couple of years, oftentimes. So.
And do you think that's in a particular area, or do you think it's across the board in terms of like what parts of the business do they kind of overestimate or or they're very, very optimistic about? Are there any particular areas of the business you think that happens in which can skew some of those projections?
Yeah, I mean, it can relate to, it's usually on the revenue side and the drivers of, if we're in the model and we say, okay, you're going to get you might be doing some paid ads, but you're going to get some word of mouth customers as well. And, most businesses don't go viral and like word of mouth marketing. It might be a long, slow slog for the first little while. And so I think that's oftentimes what we see is overly optimistic. Is someone opens a restaurant in a town of 50,000 and you see on the projections they are estimating 50,000 new customers in the first year. So they're thinking, every person in town is going to try out the restaurant in the first year. Yeah, probably not, right? So I'm just, some things like that that we often see.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears ever so slightly and talk about, so you started in 2012 and you started with your brother. So as I sort of mentioned in the intro, there's a bit of a family affair thing going on. Curious to sort of know how that's gone, like working with family members. And some people say never go into business with family, but you've obviously done it and you're still here and you've got stories to tell. So how has that experience been?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of weird. I mean, when I started in 2012, I was probably 23. And so my background's accounting. So I was kind of coming out from the finance, accounting, projection side of things. And my brother is a software developer, but at the time he was a senior in high school. So he had not gone to college yet. And he was a self-taught software developer. And so he built out that first version, but there was a whole bunch of stuff that, he just didn't know what he didn't know yet because he had no formal training. And so we built out an initial version that worked, but he probably custom coded things that there was just plugins for that he could have just used out of the box. So anyway, as he went through college, got a software engineering degree, and I think when we got to the point where we're going to need to rebuild this ProjectionHub software from the ground up, he was like, yeah, I probably don't want to be the one to do, I've already built it once. It's just tough. I don't want to do it again. So at that point, we hired an outside firm that could really help us do it again from the ground up. And my brother Brandon has been more of just an advisor on the software side. And then actually last year, finally, I decided to just buy out his share of the company. And he was looking to buy a house, and it was like, hey, if I buy you out now, you'll have your down payment ready to go, and you can get the house that you're that you're looking for. And so it's been a good experience. I hope he would say the same. I think he would say the same. It was fun to work with him, but also, I think he's got a good job that he enjoys these days. So
cool. Well, I mean, it's I always find it interesting as sort of obviously you've got the starting story, but how that dynamic works and all the rest of it. And you've been able to obviously, buy out and help with the house buying and all that kind of thing. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And I'm interested as well, sort of from obviously the start to where you are now, and obviously the business is going to have been through changes and iterations, and even alluded to some of those there. But has there been anything sort of all the way through the business, like something that has been a constant, like a principle you've always stuck with, or something that's guided you, whether it be from a business perspective or a personal perspective that's sort of kept you going, and you've always kept in mind that this is a principle that we follow religiously or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there's probably a principle that we've learned along the way that maybe I should have done sooner. I think so. I'll touch on that. We started out. I wanted to build a software as a service business because I wanted that monthly recurring revenue. I thought that who wouldn't want that, right? And I pushed and pushed to try to make ProjectionHub a software as a service business. And if I would have just watched what our customers were doing and what our customers wanted, I would have learned a lot sooner and saved myself a lot of time. But projections are kind of a one for a specific point in time. You don't necessarily need, maybe you should have ongoing projections, but that's not what entrepreneurs do. That's what we found. So entrepreneurs work on projections when the bank asks for it, when the investor asks for it, or maybe if they're doing like annual planning or something like that, but it's not something they necessarily need every month. And so they don't want to pay for something monthly if they're not really using it every month. And so I think that listening to the customer and just seeing what they've done. So we maybe 3 years ago started selling spreadsheet templates, just the Excel, one-time cost. It's an Excel template. And that started selling, and all of a sudden those different templates were selling more and faster than the software. And it's like, it sounds cool to have a software tool, but that's not what our customers wanted.
Well, the age-old principle of thinking like the fish, not like the fisherman, and getting into the mind of your client and actually spending a little time wandering in their shoes and seeing how they're using the product and going from there. I think that's always a principle I like to live by and apply and help people see and understand. And sometimes you don't see it until you see it, but that's a really interesting way or an interesting example of coming to that conclusion and actually seeing that maybe it's not falling in love with the product, it's falling in love with the customer and how they are using your thing, your product, your service, whatever it is, to solve a problem. And you've rightly identified and found that the use case for what is what you provide isn't necessarily suited to the model you're trying to force onto someone, so you've adjusted it. And I think that's an incredibly good way of sort of applying that principle. So interesting. So, and when it comes to the growth of your business, what have been some of the strategies that had the biggest impact on revenue growth, on acquisition, all that kind of thing? What are some of the things that work for you?
Yeah, one of the things that we started probably about a year and a half ago, I guess prior to that, maybe 2 years or so ago now, we hired a CPA, an accountant that would build out these custom financial models for clients that have a more complicated model than either our software or maybe a template is just, it's not specific enough for what they need. And so what we found is that partnering with other consultants, specifically pitch deck consultants, has been a really good partnership. So we have clients that are trying to raise investment. They know they need a pitch deck to present to the investors. So they're going to these different pitch deck consultants. So we started reaching out to pitch deck consultants and saying, hey, do you have anyone that helps with financial projections? Because, the investor's probably going to ask for that too. And, more times than not, they said, oh, no, we don't. And that'd be great. They didn't see us as a competitor. We don't do any pitch deck work. It was just a really mutually beneficial partnership. And so that we've got probably I don't know, maybe 5 to 7 pitch deck consultants that just keep us regularly busy with custom modeling work. So,
well, I mean, partnerships and complementary offers, services, products, working with somebody like that and having a number of those partners. I mean, it's when you get something like that and you get it working, it becomes a no-brainer, doesn't it? Because it's kind of like, well, it's, as you say, it's a regular flow of interest, sales, clients, whatever you want to call it. And that's interesting. I mean, I'd never even heard of a pitch deck consultant. I mean, I didn't even know that was a thing. But I think that in there is a bit of a lesson around if you're listening and thinking, well, how, or you should be listening, thinking, how can I apply that thinking or that example? Because you might not work with a pitch deck consultant, but it's like, what other type of consultants are out there that could also have your ideal type clients within their client base or within their prospect list or whatever it may well be, and how can you develop a relationship with them in order to see if there is anything that you could do that can add value on both sides. And yeah, partnerships, one of my favorite ways of growing businesses and all the rest of it. So I think that's a fantastic example as well. So that's cool. So Adam, this has been a really, really interesting conversation. And honestly, as I've said, finance, sometimes the eyes can glaze over for some people. And I didn't think that was going to be the case, but I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation because the possibilities with this are huge. So I want to say thank you very much for coming on, sharing your knowledge and all the rest of it. And if people want to get hold of you, find out more, see some of the templates, what's the best way to get in contact?
Yeah, our website's projectionhub.com, and then feel free to reach out to me, Adam at projectionhub.com is my email, and be happy to connect with you there.
Awesome. Well, thank you ever so much again, and have an awesome rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you, Adam.